As a final note, I just want to say a word about annulments because, some people think that they can just many Orthodox apologists think they can just bring up annulments and therefore make this problem go away. This problem for Eastern Orthodoxy, they can just make it go away if they just bring up annulments. As I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, regardless of whether or not Catholicism is true, right? Just putting a pin in that question for a second, the fact that Jesus, his apostle St. Paul, the Ante-Nicene Fathers were absolutely unanimous that there is absolutely no remarriage after divorce, that fact alone is problematic and, quite honestly, falsifying for Eastern Orthodoxy, which in fact allows for remarriage after divorce, right? That is a claim that, once again, I could make even if I was not Catholic. I can make that claim if I was secular, if I was Protestant, or whatever, right? So bringing up annulments does not actually end that discussion or get you around that discussion, right? If anything, if you want to argue that the Catholic Church is inconsistent with the teachings of Christ, go ahead and do that. But that's a separate discussion from whether or not the Orthodox Church is inconsistent with the teachings of Christ and his apostles on this matter. Okay. And the only word I'll say about annulments is that an annulment has to do with whether or not a marriage that was contracted was in fact valid to begin with, right? So that has to do with sacramental validity, right? And in the Gospels, we see clearly that our Lord gives the apostles full sacramental and disciplinary authority over the church, right? Gives to Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. He tells the apostles, whatever they bind on earth will be bound in heaven. The famous Great Commission, where he says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and baptize the nations, right? He gives them that full sacramental disciplinary authority. And so the church is the only authority that can set the criteria for what makes a particular sacrament valid or not, right? And that is what annulments teach. And that is very clearly implicit in the apostolic deposit of faith, right? That is different from the question of whether or not one can get remarried after a legitimate marriage has been contracted. Okay, that question is directly and explicitly touched on in the apostolic deposit, and it is explicitly stated that remarriage is absolutely forbidden after divorce, right? So once again, maybe it's a subtle point, but there is a clear categorical distinction between these two issues that I don't think is appreciated, at least by popular Orthodox apologists who try to just point to annulments and use that to make this problem go away for Eastern Orthodoxy. So that's really all I had for this presentation. I suppose I can see if there's any comments here. I thought I saw, let's see. I thought there was one comment that I thought might be worth addressing. Let's see. Oh yes, this was, what do we do about the Petrine privilege, meaning the Pope being able to dissolve a natural marriage between a baptized and non-baptized for the intent of the baptized to marry within the church? Okay, so this issue has to do with the difference between a sacramental versus a natural marriage. So that would kind of require actually its own discussion about how we prove that marriage is in fact a sacrament. I would highly recommend checking out the work of Kevin Fernandez on that question. He's done a lot of excellent work showing that marriage is in fact a sacrament of the new law. And basically, once you show that marriage is a sacrament, right, that there actually is a real distinction between sacramental marriage and natural marriage, it becomes clear that Christ's prohibition of remarriage after divorce was tied with his elevation of marriage to a sacrament, right? So if marriage is not a sacrament, it remains how it was prior to its elevation by Christ, which is as a natural institution, which everyone agrees as a natural institution, divorce was in fact permissible and real. And so that explains things like the Pauline privilege, the Petrine privilege, where natural marriages or unconsummated marriages, marriages that are not sacramental, right, can be dissolved, but sacramental marriages in the proper sense cannot be dissolved, right? Because once again, Christ's prohibition of remarriage after divorce was tied to his elevation of natural marriage to sacramental marriage. Okay, so obviously Protestants who don't believe that marriage is a sacrament aren't going to agree with that. And in fact, my own professor, Dr. Das, who I relied on throughout that presentation, he rejects the Pauline privilege interpretation of 1 Corinthians 7. But once again, it's in that Protestant framework where marriage is not a sacrament, where there's not a distinction between natural and sacramental marriage where this problem arises. But once you affirm that distinction between sacramental and natural marriage, I think the Catholic teaching, even on things like the Petrine privilege, the Pauline privilege, follows quite organically. But that was a good question. Thank you.